Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So just to bring to a conclusion the celebration of Gaura Purnima, I'm still in the spirit of Gaura Purnima. I'm going to talk today about the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I was really grateful for the opportunity to take part in the Abhishek. One devotee, one pujari invited me to pour all the liquids into the conch shells. So I was really fully engaged. I could really engage myself in Krishna service. But not only that, Lord Chaitanya's service, but the opportunity was there to serve all the servants of the Lord who were lined up to pour these liquids from the conch shell onto the forms, archamurtis of Chaitanya. And sometimes devotees look up to a disciple of Prabhupada, but I was really satisfied serving all the servants. So the topic or the question we'll discuss today is what is considered significant in the Bhagavad-gita by the Chaitanya Vaishnavas. And to answer that question, we'll look at the types of subject matters contained in the Bhagavad-gita verses that are quoted and included in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadas Kaviraj. This will give us the answer to the question, what's the meaning of the Bhagavad-gita for the bhakti movement? Krishnadas Kaviraj is a good source. So this talk is based on a paper given by my godbrother Garuda Das. He's a university professor of religion in America. And he's the author of at least 6 books on Gaudiya Vaishnava theology. This paper will give you an idea how scholars are trained in America to analyze books like the Chaitanya Charitamrita and the Bhagavad-gita. So he makes first an observation about how frequently the Bhagavad-gitas are quoted in the CC. If I say CC, it means Chaitanya Charitamrita. Bhagavad-gita is quoted relatively few times compared to the many passages from the Bhagavatam. Only 36 Gita verses are utilized, but over 300 Bhagavatam verses. The Chaitanya Charitamrita has 62 chapters. And in only 17 chapters are there quotations from the Bhagavad-gita. That means about a little more than 1/4 of the chapters. And he says that, Garuda says that the Chaitanya Charitamrita represents a shift What kind of shift? A shift from the bhakti movement in classical times to medieval times. What he means is that earlier, when you had theologians like Srila Ramanujacharya and Srila Madhvacharya writing, their projects dealt a lot with Vedantic arguments and Vedantic analysis. That's what he means by the classical times. So there was a shift away from that. A couple of centuries later, Srila Baladev Bijabhushan wrote the commentary, Gaudiya Vaishnava commentary, on the Vedanta Sutra. That was still part of the classical times. And then just in the medieval times, you had the six Goswamis and Krishnadas Kaviraj. And there are two themes in the Bhagavad-gita. Two themes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that are important in the Bhagavad-gita also. These are the themes of God's power, Aishvarya, and the theme of God's love, Aishvarya and Prema. Also, the writers in the Chaitanya school encountered a strong Muslim presence in India, in Vrindavan and Jagannath Puri and Navadvip. You might not know this interesting historical detail. I'll tell you that, the political situation in Jagannath Puri affected the Jagannath Puri temple. About 50 years after, less than 50 years after Lord Chaitanya left the world, the king of Jagannath Puri was allied with some of the monarchy in West Bengal, and he sent armies to fight the Muslims. And those Muslims eventually invaded Orissa, and they took over the Jagannath Puri temple. The Jagannath Puri temple was closed. They took the deities out. They closed the temple for a couple of years, maybe even 10 years or more. Yeah. But anyway, the six Goswamis and other writers like Krishnadas Kaviraj built and articulated Chaitanya's theological position from the authoritative Shastras, and they created poetic and dramatic expressions of bhakti. They wrote plays and they wrote poetry. The soul of poetry is rasa. They were writing about the rasas of Krishna. And the words were like the body of the rasa. The soul has a body. So rasa is the soul of poetry, and the words are the body of it. Kavi Karnapur especially specialized in this kind of writing. But Krishnadas Kaviraj was quite prominent in recording and describing Lord Chaitanya's mystical experience of being immersed in love of God. So what is ultimately meaningful in the Bhagavad-gita is what relates to this Krishna prema that Lord Chaitanya was demonstrating. And the philosophical discussions in the Chaitanya Charitamrita serve to describe this love of God also. And they also support the focus of the Chaitanya tradition on prema bhakti. So what we'll do is we'll review several verses in the Gita that present God's power, God's Aishvarya. And then we'll observe how they're used to understand and illuminate the intimate relationship with God in bhakti. And then, secondly, we'll review Gita verses that present the soul in relation to God's love. Okay, everybody seems attentive, except for a couple of eyes, like this. Many years ago in the 1970s in the Boston temple, there was a devotee who had a squirt gun, a spray bottle. And so Krishnadas Kaviraj mentions in the Adi Lila, chapter 5, the metaphysics of the Bhagavad-gita. The Gita expresses over and over, again and again, that the Ishvara Tattva always consists of achintya Shakti. God's control has something inconceivable about it. Krishnadas paraphrases 2 verses from the 9th chapter that mention the metaphysical paradox of God's being and yet not being in relation to all other things. God's being and his yet not being in relation to all other beings. This verse from the Bhagavad-gita. I exist in the world and the world exists in me. Yet I do not exist in the world, nor does the world exist in me. So you've probably considered that when you were reading the Bhagavad-gita, you probably stopped there and structured it in your brain. I exist in the world and the world exists in me, yet I do not exist in the world, nor does the world exist in me. So this is achintya Ishvara, or some incomprehensible power. And according to Krishnadas, it's an essential message of Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita. Yet when Lord Chaitanya discusses this with Rupa Goswami, he mentions these 2 verses from the 9th chapter that show how the power, the Ishvara, Aishvarya, how that recedes when there's intimacy with God. When intimacy with God becomes prominent, that recedes. So Lord Chaitanya discusses with Rupa the verses that Arjuna speaks after he sees the Virata Rupa, the universal form. Arjuna says to Krishna, carelessly thinking of you as my companion, I called you friend. I forgot your divine majesty, owing to my passion or illusion. In joking and relaxing and enjoying with you, I have been unappreciative of your power. Please forgive my informality. So we just talked about the Achintya Shakti of the Aishvarya. God is in the world, He's not in the world. And then also how the Aishvarya recedes when there's intimacy in connection between a devotee and God. Now we'll go on to Bhagavad-gita 10:42, which also expresses Krishna's incomprehensible power. 10:42 says, it's a question, what's the use, Krishna says, of the knowledge of my opulence? I've given you so many examples of my opulence in the world. Krishna gives over 80 examples of his opulence in the world. And then says, what's the use of this knowledge? I constantly sustain this universe with a mere fraction of my power. So this verse describes the Paramatma. The Paramatma's power is called Vibhuti. And when Krishna lists the opulences, the way in which he can be seen through his opulences in the world, that's also referred to as Vibhuti. So sometimes the idea is there of Vibhuti Yoga. We connect with God by connecting with his opulence. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, chapter 2, this verse is used in support of Chaitanya's identity as Krishna. At the beginning of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj wants to establish that Chaitanya is Krishna. And he brings this verse in. And then elsewhere, the same verse is used by Chaitanya in his metaphysical discussions with Sanatana Goswami. And later, this verse upholds the doctrine of the avatars and the Shaktivesh avatar. The verse again is I constantly sustain this universe with a mere fraction of my power. So the principle is asserted that God has unlimited power and can manifest himself effortlessly in whatever form he wants. Then we have the next verse, Bhagavad-gita 10:10. How does that go? Louder? Can you say it louder? Tesam satata yuktanam bhajatam priyati purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tvam. This verse is mentioned 3 times in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And it's Actually, the first Gita verse presented in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's text 49 of chapter 1. It says that among those who are constantly engaged in worshiping me with love, I give them the understanding that by which they can come to me. This word understanding, Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi Yoga has two components: Buddhi, intelligence, and Yoga. Yoga can be taken as discipline. One practices yoga as a discipline, so Buddhi Yoga. So Krishnadas Kaviraj uses this verse to explain the divine function of the manifestation of the Guru for the Bhakta. Krishna manifests to the Bhakta as the Guru. Among those who are constantly engaged in worshipping me with love, I give the intelligence and discipline, Buddhi Yoga, by which they can come to me. Jai SriSriRadhaRasbihari, SriSriRadhaRasbihariTemple, Hanuman, Jai Sri Gaura Nitai. So we were discussing a couple of minutes ago, the idea that the Chaitanya Charitamrita asserts that God has unlimited power and can manifest himself effortlessly. And then we mentioned the Bhagavad-gita verse 10:10. How he gives the Bhakta intelligence, especially as the Guru. He manifests as the Guru, but he himself descends to establish Dharma. That's also pointed out in the CC, quoting the Bhagavad-gita verses, chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Um, 7 and 8. How does 7 begin? What's the first word? Yada yada hidamasya glani bhavati bharata abhyutanam madhamasya tadatmanam srijamyaham paritranaya sadunam vinashaya chaduskritam. So that makes it clear what the purpose is when God descends. In the 3rd chapter of Adi Leela, Krishnadas quotes Bhagavad-gita verses from the 3rd chapter, Numbers 21 and 24. There Krishna says that he practices his own divine dharma. Krishna practices dharma. He says, if I didn't do that, I couldn't establish the proper example for everyone. So the Chaitanya school strongly emphasizes that God's power is significant not in and of itself, but insofar as the deity extends himself in loving relation to the soul, to teach the soul how to act in this world, either through the Guru or through the Dharma, the examples that Krishna sets. Then Krishnadas Kaviraj establishes the ontological category of the souls Jiva Sarup, Jiva Sarup. And the souls are in relation to the Ishvara Tattva. Leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it. The souls are in relation to the Ishvara Tattva. And the souls are also apart from the Ishvara Tattva. This is established by quoting Bhagavad-gita 7.5. 7.5. Anybody remember 7.5? Yeah, besides, Krishna's talking about matter in chapter 7 at the beginning. And he says, besides matter, besides this lower nature, the material energy, there's a higher nature consisting of the individual spiritual beings. And it's by these spiritual beings that the world becomes animated. So this establishes that the soul is eternally distinct from God. And therefore there's a possibility of an eternal loving relationship between them. If the soul were not distinct from God, how could there be any possibility of a relationship? That's established by quoting Bhagavad-gita 7.5. And two more verses in the Gita are presented by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as most important instructions in the Gita. Verses 64 and 65 from chapter 18. Krishna says to Arjuna, because you're my very dear friend, I'm speaking to you the supreme, most confidential instruction for your benefit. Be absorbed in thinking of me. Be my devotee, sacrifice everything for me, and bow down to me. Certainly you will come to me, I promise you this, for you're my very dear friend. Chaitanya quotes these texts in the context of having connections with saintly devotees. Chaitanya is talking about the need, the necessity of having connections with saintly devotees when he quotes this verse about Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna says to Arjuna, Krishna has given Arjuna in the Bhagavad-gita teachings that would provide protection for the whole world. So it's significant that Krishna is God. He can instruct the whole world. But equally important, and in some ways more important, is that Krishna is Arjuna's guru and his friend. Their relationship is the paradigm or the example of the power of connection with virtuous and devout persons. When we talk about sadhu sangha, we can start by talking about the sadhu sangha that Arjuna had with Krishna. Krishna acted as a sadhu in relation to Arjuna. He acted as the saintly person, the guru. So his relationship with Arjuna is a paradigm or example of virtuous sadhu sangha. The Gita also speaks of some processes in relation to devotion to Krishna. What are some processes in relation to bhakti? Some of these processes are useful in attaining bhakti. Bhagavad-gita 7:16, quoted in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, acknowledges there are 4 types of persons who take up bhakti. So these processes are a transition to bhakti. If you're distressed, if you're in need, if you're curious about God. Another process that's mentioned in the Bhagavad-gita that's related to taking up bhakti is the realization of Brahman. This is mentioned in the 18th chapter, verse 34, and it's quoted 3 times in the CC. One who is transcendentally situated in or absorbed in Brahman, transcendentally situated in Brahman or absorbed in Brahman, becomes joyful and fully serene, completely serene. He does not lament or desire. Na sochati, na kanchati. And he's equal to all beings. He gains the highest devotional love to me. Traditionally, the verse that is seen as the ultimate statement of the Gita in terms of coming to bhakti is 1866. Sarvadharman parityaja. Abandon all purposes in dharma, accept me as your only shelter, and surrender unto me. I shall free you from all sins. Do not fear. But Lord Chaitanya in the CC tells Ramananda Roy that there's more than giving up everything for the purpose of serving God. There's more than Sarvadharman parityaja. He encourages Ramananda Roy to tell him more. But this verse, 1866, is used to express the importance of an exclusive focus on surrender to Krishna. Lord Chaitanya also mentions that fruitive action, karma must be renounced. And the actions described in the Bhagavad-gita for the purpose of coming to Prema Bhakti, those are described: whatever you do, whatever you eat or offer, whatever you give, whatever austerities you perform, do them as an offering for me. And the early verses of the 6th chapter present yoga as a meditation on God and a preparation for bhakti. So there's a whole set of verses that are considered transitory. They're meant to bring the seeker into bhakti yoga, either through karma yoga or physical yoga, ashtanga yoga, or dovetailing the actions like eating and whatever you're doing, whatever you're giving in charity, whatever austerities you perform, do them as an offering to Krishna. There's a few more verses that we'll discuss. Another key verse, Bhagavad-gita 7:14, is quoted 3 times in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This divine power of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is very difficult to overcome, but those who surrender unto me can cross beyond it. Krishnadas uses this verse to indicate that surrendering to Krishna means transcending the modes of material nature by the grace of God. Bhagavad-gita 10.10 is quoted again to express the assistance of God in overcoming the difficulties experienced in sadhana bhakti. Krishna promises he'll help the sadhaka by giving him intelligence. And Bhagavad-gita 10.8 is quoted by Krishnadas to emphasize connections with saintly bhaktas. We were discussing earlier saintly bhaktas. 10.8 says, intelligent persons who know that I'm the origin of everything become filled with devotional love, and together these persons worship me. Next, Chaitanya quotes a sequence of 8 verses in the 12th chapter that describe the personal qualities of devotees. These are verses 13 through 20. 8 verses, 13 through 20 in the 12th chapter. They're about those who are dear to Krishna. Who's dear to Krishna? Krishna says, this kind of person is dear to me, because he has these qualities. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya is teaching Sanatan about how to renounce activities and how to fill your life with devotion. That's the context for quoting the verses in chapter 12. In the 4th verse of the Gita, chapter 11, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. What's the Sanskrit? Yayatam mam prapadyante. So this is presented in CC as the philosophical principle behind rasa. Everyone can have a relationship with Krishna, a rasa. Everyone. Yayatamam prapadyante. It's also presented in connection with the gopis, intense love for Krishna, the love of the gopis. In this case, the verse is quoted, and the point is made that the gopis' love is an exception to this promise. Krishna says to them that he cannot reciprocate with their love. He's unable to reciprocate with their love because it's so intense and so pure. Therefore, Krishna says, I'm a debtor. I owe you a great debt. And Krishnadas Kaviraj makes the point that the indebtedness to the gopis is the perfection of prema bhakti. If you can make Krishna indebted to you for your love, that's something special. That's perfection. So we reached the end, and here's the concluding remark. the foundations and even the esoteric understandings of bhakti for the Chaitanya tradition are clearly rooted in the Bhagavad-gita, according to the CC. Everything's rooted in the Bhagavad-gita, in the CC. Both the foundations and the esoteric understandings. So, if Garuda were here, we could thank him. His name in the university is Professor Schweig. Professor Schweig. Thank you, Professor Schweig. Garuda is a very jolly devotee. One of the symptoms of bhakti is you're jolly. Garuda has a lot of humor. As I said, though, he's exceptionally well studied. He's very learned, and he's written at least 6 books about Gaudiya Vaishnava theology for academic use, but also for popular readers. When he was a graduate student in Harvard, he had to come up with an idea, a theme for his dissertation, for his PhD. So fortunately, his advising professor was a very learned person and knew quite a lot about the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And he said to Garuda, why don't you go and look for some research on the most confidential topic of the 10th canto, the Rasa dance. See what you can find in the library. And Garuda went back to his professor and said, I didn't find any really books exclusively about Rasa Lila. So his advisor said to him, that is your PhD topic. And so he wrote The Dance of Divine Love. The book is called The Dance of Divine Love. And because he knew Sanskrit, he could go through all the verses of the 10th canto of the 5 chapters and present them very nicely according to the understanding given by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was encouraging Garuda quite a bit. Garuda got 2 master's degrees before he got his PhD. He went to the 2 most important schools in America for South Asian studies, the University of Chicago, got a master's degree, then he went to Harvard and got a master's degree, and then he got his PhD. So he was really, top. And so he got into teaching. Of course, he got into teaching. He teaches at the Christopher Newport University in Virginia. Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? Vishnu Gada.
Thank you, Tattvavit Prabhu. You were quoting nicely some Bhagavad-gita shlokas, and you were emphasizing how it's important that Krishna was understood as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but also he had a relationship with Arjuna, both. Of course, we know in the beginning of Bhagavad-gita, before the 2nd chapter, Prabhupada said that they were having a conversation just like friends. But then Arjuna said, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava pichamitam dharma sambuddha cheta shishyastayam sharimam tvam prapadnam. And now I accept you. I'm accepting you as my guru. That's it. And then that became the beginning of the Bhagavad-gita. So it seems like there's a little bit of back and forth there. On one hand, it is important that he's a friend, but on the other hand, he had to take the position of being subordinate and a disciple before he could actually get the full appreciation of the Bhagavad-gita. Could you make any comment about that?
Yes, it's really important to surrender. Karpanya dosha pahata svabhava. To actually use your human life properly. It's a great gift, human life. And if you keep this gift and try to use it selfishly, like a miser, in the wrong way, then you're a miser, karpanya. So Arjuna is saying, I'm like that. He has a realization that I'm not able to fight. I'm thinking somehow I'm karpanya dosha pahata svabhava. There's this fault in my heart, this weak-heartedness. So please, Krishna, give me the right instruction. He couldn't solve his problems on his own. The next verses make that point, or the previous verses, right there, they make that point that even if I win, or if I had the sovereignty of the kingdom of heaven, I wouldn't be able to get rid of this distress that I feel in fighting my relatives. And then Krishna instructs him. And he says, actually, eventually he says to Arjuna, you were present with me before. I instructed this knowledge before to the sun god. And you were present, but you forgot. But I don't forget. But in the Bhagavad-gita, in the 4th chapter, when Krishna says, I'm going to tell you now this confidential knowledge, and at the end, when he says, because you're my very dear friend, I'm going to tell you this supreme knowledge. Garuda, in his translation of the Bhagavad-gita, he especially emphasizes that the most confidential knowledge is the relationship between the devotee and the Lord. Garuda's translation of the Bhagavad-gita it was requested. A big important publishing company in America wanted a new edition of the Bhagavad-gita. So they went to the scholars in the American Academy of Religion, and they looked for someone who could be the translator. And one scholar recommended to the book company, why don't you ask Dr. Schweik? He's, really he'd be a very good translator. So Garuda took up this translation work. And his translation came out in the year 2004. And when it came out, or no, not 2004, but around, anyway, the date's not important. But another scholar, another devotee who became a scholar, he did a translation of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, because the big publishing company, Penguin Books, wanted a translation of the 10th canto. So this devotee scholar did the translation. And that was published in 2004. I remember getting the book. I ordered the book, and I told one of my godbrothers about this new book. And he's one of the directors of the BBT. He was like Gopal Krishna Goswami. He was one of the 5 or 6 directors of the BBT. I told him about this translation of the 10th canto. And the BBT director said, how dare he translate the 10th canto? There's Prabhupada's translation, the Krishna book. And I didn't see the objection. I said, well, it's like this, if somebody calls you on the telephone and says, could you come to our college and discuss the 10th canto? Or could you come and discuss the Bhagavad-gita? You wouldn't say no, I can't do it, I'll just give you Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada expected us to be trained to speak to educated people about his books. So I said, what's wrong with translating for a new publisher? And I found like the translation of the Gita by Garuda to really complement Prabhupada's work. Interesting to study them together. I was the editor of Burijan's book, Surrender Unto Me, that book that takes you through the verses one by one and shows you how the Bhagavad Gita is structured, how the sections are structured. And it relies on the commentaries of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and others. Surrender Unto Me, an overview of the Bhagavad Gita. So these kind of extra books help us understand the Bhagavad Gita, understand Prabhupada's Gita. Did I answer your question, Vishnu Gadapu?
Hare Krishna, yes. I would just add one comment. I agree with you that if the other translations or other aspects of the time, of course that's given, it would be given that there isn't any, that it's in perfect alignment with Srila Prabhupada's, because it does happen, even by devotees in ISKCON, that sometimes a translation or a commentary will introduce things that are not in Srila Prabhupada or is different from Srila Prabhupada, so we have to be careful about that.
Sure. But your question about the question of Arjuna and Krishna, how he had to become subordinate.
Yes, that was the beginning.
Yeah.
That's the beginning. And then the basis of all our relationships is that surrender.
Yeah.
And then friendship, or servitorship, parental love, etc.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you were mentioning that Buddhi Yoga means, Buddhi means intelligence and Yoga means discipline. Yoga means discipline. So, I heard that generally Buddhi... So, Buddhi means intelligence and Yoga means connection with God. So,
Buddhi and yoga?
Buddhi means intelligence, Yoga means connection with God. Connection.
Yes.
So, could you explain that? You mentioned that Yoga means discipline.
Yoga can mean discipline.
So, can you explain how?
Well, you have different practices in yoga. You know, you have yam, niyam. You have to follow certain rules. You're expected to be non-violent, truthful, and you follow some discipline to raise your consciousness, so that ultimately you can meditate on the Paramatma. That's the ultimate samadhi. You withdraw the senses, and you actually have your consciousness focused on the heart, where the Paramatma and the soul are seated.
In the bhakti path, what are these rules, regulations? In the path of bhakti, so this discipline is rules, regulations, 64 limbs, like that.
Are you saying, is it like that?
Yeah.
Is it like that the preliminary steps in bhakti. There's also preliminary steps in hatha yoga. Yeah, you could say that. And then the asanas and the pranayam. That's also it's a discipline. You practice those postures, and you learn about the prana and the circulation of the air. You learn about the nerves. The body is all these nerves connected to the brain. So it's a different kind of discipline. You're focused more on, Prabhupada said it's for those in the bodily concept of life. That's me for sure. I like to practice yoga because I'm in the bodily concept of life.
Bhakti or hatha? Huh? Bhakti or hatha, or both? Bhakti or ashtanga, or both?
Well, I like to practice both.
Okay. So I just wanted to make a comment that, in Sanskrit there are so many words, and it's not that one word just has one meaning.
No.
That's really important because, for example, Prabhupada gives the example of Atma. And Atma can mean like what?
The body, the mind, or the soul.
Body, mind, so many things. Another area where one word gets messed up is the word nitya. You know nitya? What does nitya mean?
Eternal.
Eternal, yeah. But usually you take nitya to mean always in the past, in the present, in the future, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah. But what about nitya baddha? What about nitya baddha? Eternally conditioned. But actually Srila Prabhupada didn't know. Eternally conditioned, nitya baddha doesn't mean we've always been conditioned. It means the meaning of nitya in that case is that it's so far long ago that we can't trace it out. Not that it was always there. So according to context, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu translated the Atmaram verse in so many different ways by taking each verse, and there's so many different explanations. So yoga can mean discipline, and it can also mean, as you said, connection. Both in different context. Hare Krishna.
There's a question in the middle. Madhyama.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. My question is, intelligence disturb devotion. So how to work on that? To control this thing?
Can you help me? Intelligence is disturbing his bhakti, and how to work on that. Your intelligence is not in the service of bhakti? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, generally I feel that, our intelligence disturb devotion towards Lord Krishna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be, it's a simple thing actually. There's just either your intelligence is misguided by the mind and the senses, and you're trying to serve the mind and the senses, or the extended self, the family, the world, more or less selfish or egocentric. The egocentric concept of the self, the false ego. I'm this body. Or your intelligence is purified and it's engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikesh. Our body is a combination of senses given to us by the Lord. We're not the real proprietor of the body. So when we work toward that kind of understanding, we work toward understanding that these senses should be engaged in Krishna's service, then our intelligence is working the way Krishna expects us to use it. Is that all right? Is that enough of an answer for you? Okay. We'll stop here. We'll hear from you tomorrow, Vishnu Gada. Not, you want to speak now?
Just that in Bhagavad-gita, Krishna says that those who study this conversation worship me by their intelligence. So very simple method to get the intelligence on your side and Krishna's side, your real side, is to read Bhagavad-gita. Hare Krishna.
Yay. Tomorrow we'll hear your class. Krishna willing. Hare Krishna, thank you very much, O Gaura Srila Prabhupada.